Hi, I'm Marsha Mason, artist with Rancho Cordova Arts. Watercolor is a medium where you can engage both sides of your brain. Like Leonardo da Vinci, we can explore the science and the art. Well, while I was testing painting strategies for mixing paints for the second video on foliage colors, I was reminded how important it is to know what your paint will do for you. And to do that, I want to pass on a handful of tips for when you go about choosing your watercolor paints. So let's say you go to the store, you look at an online catalog, and you see all these marketing names. You see olive greens and sap greens and hooker greens and viridian greens, and you say, I need a couple of greens. So you say, I'll just get one of these viridian hues and a phthalo green. Well, just like the scientific and common names for plants, pigweed is a name we can call some 40 species of plants. So here's tip number one. There is no one-to-one relationship between pigments and marketing names. Now, all those names I told you about, the viridian hue and sap green and all those are marketing names. They have nothing to do with usually don't have much to do with what pigments are in the tubes of paint. You really can't be sure. If you had bought those two paints, you'd have two with the same paint in it. That's a bummer. So these numbers right here, PG7 means pigment green, number 7, phthalo green. Those are standardized pigment identifiers. I can look up any pigment number and find out what the properties of those pigments are, and that's exactly what I do. Now, I prefer paints that have one single pigment, so I know exactly what this paint will do when I use it for my artwork. And sometimes I like to buy convenience mixtures. And that's what the second video on foliage colors is about. It's multiple pigments in one tube. Some of those are great, but do look at what pigments are being used, because sometimes you'll find pigments that are cheap for the manufacturer to use, but maybe not as light fast as you'd like. So, permanent green light, number 1. This was in my list of tubes of paint that all said PG7 on the back, just that one pigment. And I looked at that and I said, no way, that is not pigment green number 7. This, I know, this one doesn't look right. It's much yellower. And I had another tube of paint. I am rich in greens. So this paint is just about exactly the same color. It's a different brand, and it's also called Permanent Green number 1. But on the back of it, it does say it's added 2 yellows to the pigment green 7, the phthalo green. So let's test this one that just says it's PG7, because who knows, maybe they found a way to tweak the pigment by cooking it a little bit before they put it in the tube. So trust but verify. So I know what the mixing complements are of pigment green 7, the phthalo green. And I can get pretty close to black by mixing 2 of them together. So what I'm going to do is just squeeze a little bit of the pigment green 7 out here. And I'm going to take these 4 colors. I've got a cadmium scarlet, a cadmium red, a Quinacridone Scarlet, and a Perylene Maroon. And I know from my reading that all of these, when mixed with the phthalo green, will make a black or something pretty close to it. And I think that's a pretty good test, because I suspect that what we've got in this tube right here, our paint that says, oh yeah, it's just one pigment, it's just phthalo green, is not quite right. Somebody missed putting the yellow on there. So we're just gonna test it. I love doing this kind of stuff. It's science. Okay, our last one is the Perylene Maroon. Now, first we're going to do our test with our known phthalo green, our pigment green, PG7. So, when I mix these, I should get something that's pretty close to black. Oh, yeah. Okay, well, you can see that we're getting it. Put a little bit more in there. Well, it's pretty dark color. That was the Cadmium Scarlet. Here's, oh, look at those blend. Here is our Cadmium Red. So far, so good. Now, here is our Quinacridone Scarlet. Ooh, that really is dark. Darker than the other two. Oh, that's yummy. Okay. And lastly, our Perylene Maroon. Come here. Oh, yeah. Okay, so when we mix these mixing complements, it's different than visual complements. That's just what you see. It's opposite. Okay, I'm just going to spread these out a little bit so you can see what kind of colors we're talking about. And that is our true, there you go, that's our phthalo green. Now, here is our questionable paint that says it's only phthalo green. I don't believe it. Now, if they've added something, it's got to be yellow. And when we add these reds to this green, I am expecting to get something that's more on the unsaturated orange scale. But let's just take a look. Oh, I think we need a little more of that. Oh, there we go. Get organized here. There we go. All right. Here we go. And it's not even close to going dark, because I suspect that yellow pigment, that the mystery pigment, here's another one, a little darker, but still not anywhere close to a gray or black, like I would expect from the phthalo green. Yeah, that yellow is really dominant in this. Oh, let's pick up a little more of that. Oop, come here. That one is the Quinacridone Scarlet. We'll give it a little more. Still pretty brown. All it is stronger. And last, we have our Perylene Maroon. Let's see what we get. Mystery lamp. Okay. Here we go. So, none of these are coming out like we would expect. So, we have just verified that these have more than just the pigment green number 7 in them. So this is missing something on the back. So here's tip number 3. As much as possible, buy single pigment paints and mix your own colors. Now, tip number 4 is you will be doing yourself a favor to use artist quality, well-known brand name watercolor paint. When I paint, I stick with my favorite 3 brands, Winsor Newton, Daniel Smith, and Holbein. There are others, but those are the 3 I like best. This paint that was questionable is not one of those brands. Okay, so we bring some paint home. The nice thing about watercolor paint in a tube is there's a good chance you'll never have to throw it away for getting old. Now, how is that? Well, when I get a new tube of paint, I open it up and I put a little bit of petroleum jelly on the threads. That way it's kind of sealed up. And it makes it so it won't stick. Sometimes the paint will dry and it'll be hard to get off the lid. But I put a little petroleum jelly on the threads. It always comes off easily. Next, if the paint starts to go dry, you can open it up and add a little water. Now, if you squeeze the tube on the sides here, just a little bit, usually the paint will go down, and that's when you can take clean water. I'm not going to do it with this because this is dirty water. It's all green and orange. And you just drop in a drop, put your tube back on, cap back on, and let it sit, and it will re-moisturize your paint. And if it's really dry, you can soak the entire tube in water with the cap off, and you'll probably be able to get some paint out of there. And that is very handy to know. So I've given you a handful of tips today, 5, and this is the review. There is no one-to-one relationship between marketing names and pigments. Pigments are standardized by an international society. If it says it, that's what it is. Tip 2, choose paints by the pigments that are in it, not that marketing name. 3, choose single pigment paints as much as possible. That way you can do the mixes and you'll know exactly what's in them. 4, use artist quality paints from well-respected brands. You can always, if you have a brand that is new to you, you can always go online and say review, brand name, paints, and it will tell you a lot about them from people who have used them. And last, take care of your tubes of paint by keeping the moisture content up. Prevent it from evaporating by putting a little jelly, petroleum jelly on the threads, and add water to paint that's starting to dry up by giving it a little space at the top, or if it gets really bad, you can soak it in water. That's it for today. We encourage you, when you paint something, to post your photo of that on Rancho Cordova Art's Facebook page. Rancho Cordova Arts, and I thank you for watching. I'll be back with more Watercolor 101 videos. I've got another one on foliage to do, so stay tuned.